I'm Steven. My buddy, Andrew. Andrew, you want to say hey real quick and introduce yourself?
Yeah, hey, thanks, Steven. Andrew Ventresca here. I'm an Azure specialist on the data and AI team that supports Department of Navy, but support federal customer and the DoD at large. Excited for today's session with Dean. I'll give a quick intro, but I'll turn it back over to Steven real quick.
Fantastic. And like Andrew had mentioned, my name's Stephen Cole, and I actually support the Army in a smorgasbord of different federal customers in some way, shape, or form because of the liaison taking place between the Army and several of the other federal agencies. So we actually put a link in the chat. So if you're in the audience, you get a question related to the topic, whether it be security, Azure specific, Gov specific, data interoperability specific, Andrew probably can give you some pointers on various topics related to Navy and Navy basketball at the Naval Academy. No, I'm teasing. So there's a lot of things that that we can cover down on. If you got questions, there's a link that's in the chat, and actually we'll cover that here in just a second. I'll actually share my screen here. So for those of you who are following on the recording, you can follow along here. This is the forms link that you'll want to that you'll want to follow to submit your question. It's also available in the chat. We have some intros, just letting you know that the data and AI team here at Microsoft, we've got a smorgasbord of different folks, a bunch of different people that support and cover down on the respective mil depths. If you got an invite and you cover down on one of these particular agencies, the alignment and the individual that's there, we'll put their emails in the chat at a later point in time during today's session. And we do this every month. So speed dating is meant to be an opportunity to create an informal discussion. There are counterparts that you work with there at your respective offices where you cover down on, where if you're searching for either a Microsoft resource or an Azure specific resource or a cloud specific resource on how to accomplish your mission, this is the team that we're going to want to connect you with. Dean, who's a guest speaker today, he's going to be talking a little bit more about tangential topics related to data. And in future sessions, we're going to get into, obviously with the advent of Azure Open AI coming to Gov, what a landing zone, ops, and innovation has to do with data in your mission. You're welcome to continue to join each one of these sessions that we have. We've done some previous sessions in the past. Kyla, in that email that she had referenced a little bit earlier, will send out that repository of detail for you to take a look at. Andrew, real quick, let's jump in today's session and talk a little bit about Dean.
Yeah, no, awesome. Appreciate it, Stephen. And thanks everyone for joining again. So I've had the pleasure to work with Dean for probably about a year and a half, but I've known him, Dean is well known across the team when I joined the Microsoft Federal team. He's a director of security, compliance, identity, and accessibility for the Microsoft Federal team. He's been at Microsoft for 23 years, and like I said, everyone knows him and loves working with him. He helped support the Navy team, but he's had a lot of experience across the DoD. He's even spent 7 years on the SharePoint product engineering team. So his experience and connections run deep across Microsoft and the DoD. He's the go-to resource when it comes to security and zero trust throughout the DoD. And like I said, he's really interacted across the DoD to include the Marine Corps, and now with to include the Air Force, and now with the Navy and the Marine Corps. So it's just a real pleasure to have Dean here today. And I'll turn it over to you, sir.
Well, thank you very much for the great introduction, Andrew. So my name is Dean Halstead, like everybody's been saying the last couple of minutes. And what we want to do is make this a little bit of an interactive session today. The agenda that we're going to go over is kind of a smorgasbord, a survey of different areas about how security and data kind of collide together, and how we can make a better overall sort of approach to get every organization ready for a better, secure, more thorough approach, make happier security cyber operators, and also understand how you can get ready and future leaning for AI that you probably heard within your enterprises. Everybody's talking about, Copilot and artificial intelligence and open AI, and everybody's wondering, well, what do we need to do? How can we get ready?
We may have lost Dean, but I think he's coming right back in.
Can everybody hear me?
We got you. Like nothing happened, Dean. You're back in business.
I'm sure somebody just didn't like what I was saying. I'm sure of it. It was probably AI. It heard me and it said, "Oh, we're just going to cut you off right there." So we're going to be going over all these different areas, and the first thing that I wanted to talk about is everybody, when they look at either security or AI, really the biggest thing is that you have to get ready. Okay, we are in a new era of AI, and it's really all about data and security and securing your data. Interesting story a few years ago, and this kind of relates to data because essentially you're going to be probably going through the same sort of journey with your ADX, your data lakes and your data warehouses of, when you unleash artificial intelligence, similar to, as it was said, I was on the SharePoint team, when we unleashed SharePoint to go out and crawl the entire enterprise, what we did is we found data that they didn't know that they had. So essentially, what the context of what you're looking at is, even though SharePoint respected the ACLs and the permissions and everything of the data that it was going and indexing, and it pruned it, the organization itself had not actually gone through and secured all the data in accordance with the way it should be. So it was more security through obscurity. Now with this whole iteration of AI and having more of a data source that goes out and looks across the entire organization and larger, deeper data sets, you're not going to be able to basically do security through obscurity anymore. So really, this is about how to get ready for that and how to actually interact and work with your security operators to bring them into a unified platform that should make it easier for you. So when you look at the migration and modernizing of sensitive data sets, essentially what you're looking at is a couple of different ways in which Microsoft is trying to enable you to organize, to secure, and to audit the data and the access access to that data. So many of you have, in many different conversations, have asked about, PII, sensitive, policy-based approach for access to either row or actual data sets all themselves. And then in the higher security enclaves, they're asking about, well, how do we make it so that we can take the keys away and essentially all the data is unusable because it's encrypted. So those are the three things that we're going to really be talking about today: is row level security, Purview for a policy-based approach, and then CMK for encryption and you owning the keys to your own kingdom. So with that, let's go ahead and start out with the first set, which is what is possible. Essentially, many of you may or may not know that you can do row-level security to restrict access within ADX. So there's an article, and we'll kind of go into the details of how you do that. The interesting thing is that there are better ways to do it, usually through a policy-based, because you're not writing code, you're doing more policies. And then how do you can maintain that control long-term and make sure that the data is, the people that have access to it should have access to it. So we're going to be going into all of those. So for the first thing, let's see here. We're going to go into securing ADX and PII. So raise of hands, I think we have raise of hands or thumbs up. How many people have been asked about how to secure data and ADX and information within their enterprises, but are kind of wondering where to start? Is that true? Good. Any claps? Any thumbs up? Okay, I've got a couple on. I see a couple. Good. So if you look at row level sort of security, you can do things like you can actually make the actual row level itself access controlled, or you can do data masking. There's a couple different ways in which you can kind of secure the data, whether if it's PII or other. PII, most people, I was in the military, I can probably see the flag behind me. So the military, normally what we would do is we would mask out social security numbers. You'd have the last four. So you can kind of see that in this example. But sometimes it's not even just masking the data, it's completely eliminating the visibility of that. And that's really, you're looking at row level security. Maybe HR or others would have access to that information. And the normal everyday user or commanders or organizational leaders would have access to it, but the everyday user wouldn't. Next, when you look down, kind of the stepping down of how you progressively increase the security across your ADX repositories, is looking into encryption. Many of you may or may not have heard of Azure Key Vault. And with Azure Key Vault, there is a concept called customer managed key. And that's where we were talking about the ability to kind of take the keys to the kingdom with you. So within Azure Key Vault, you can connect it into your ADX repository. You can connect it into Purview. We're going to be going into that in just a second. And that's how you can take that control at the organizational level, that you can be confident that you have those keys. Next, when you look at kind of the next level down, is how do you audit the access to all of that information? You're going to have policies, you're going to have security, but now if your security folk, your cyber operators want to go back and look at maybe some sort of data breach or other sort of unauthorized access, they can go back and look at it in an audit and monitoring methodology. For that, they're going to have to figure out, okay, where is that data? Who accessed, under what policy, under what permissions, and when? And that is really by setting up Azure Monitor. Azure Monitor gets that telemetry, and that's where the cyber operators are really going to look at, is the telemetry. And the telemetry is actually brought into the broader sense of Sentinel and the cyber space, whether it's being protected at the desktop level, access, or patching, or computer management through like Intune or other sorts of things, or their authentication through things like Entra ID, where it's looking at is complied connect, is the machine and is the user appropriate and appropriately patched and coming from the right network and all these sorts of things. All of those audit logs go together, but now you can add the Azure Monitor pieces to give a holistic approach to not only where they came from, but what they were doing and how they were moving horizontally across the enterprise. So this extends the data set visibility into the cyber operator space. Then we have things like the least privileges, tongue twister there, which is referred to as PIM, Privileged Identity Management. That's actually something that is a best practice that we've seen across the DoD being enacted, allowing people to have, when they need access to higher level information, there's additional authentications and auditing that goes along with those least privileges sort of approach. So it's not permanent. Back in the days. Is there a question?
I think, Stephen, did you drop a question from the forum in the chat?
Yeah, I did. There's an Army customer who had asked a question about indicators and anomalies.
Okay.
We should be monitoring in our data to detect potential cyber threats or attacks, but I wanted to ask you a little bit later on, but you can jump into that one if you have the ability to kind of riff on that a little bit, Dean.
Yeah, so for anomalies detection, there's a couple of different ways in which it's going to be highlighted. We have EUBA, which is basically user-based control access. So what does a user normally do? Okay, and so if a user normally goes in and looks at one data table and a couple of different data sets, and maybe edits or posts to one data set. And that's their normal course of business. But in one day, they actually are doing a querying for all the data within a data set. That would be flagged under EUBA as a uncharacteristic sort of action and activity. So those types of things are going to be correlated and automatically flagged for the cyber operators to look at and to evaluate. And actually, there can be follow-on policies, what you do as immediate remediation, like you don't let them access it, or you cut off access, or you reset their account, or whatever happens to be. So these types of things can happen within the context of not only the data sources, but actually the authentication and some of the policies that you set up within the enterprise. Does that answer the question to the gentleman?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, it does. And it's probably going to create some other ones. So I'll follow up with them based off of that answer and then forward the video too. So I appreciate that context, Dean. Back to you, buddy.
No problem. So we're back on like PIM and privilege identity and least privileges. Essentially, it used to be that people had the keys to the kingdom. I remember way back in the military, there would be people that were given access to file servers and other sorts of infrastructure that were never revoked. And so once you were admin, you were always an admin. That is a really bad scenario to be in, especially with huge amounts of data. So you want to have a least privileges approach to allow you to, as appropriate, when needed, as the task or a condition is met, as far as the enterprise needs you to update the tables or modify the way in which the data is structured, or those types of kind of admin sort of approaches that the data modelers and other things would need. That's when they would that's when they would have the elevated privileges. The rest of the time they would be at a lower privilege. So that kind of follows out the access control approach. Then we move into the data classification. Really, with the data classification, you're looking at metadata and information within the data tables and about the data tables. And this is where Azure Purview comes in and looks at or applies policies against that data information. The access, who can access it, what type of information is it, what sort of actions can be taken, and it actually creates audit logs of those additional sort of a higher level of metadata information about what's going on in accessing that data and information, and actually allows you to control much more granularly what is done with the data and who it's shared with. So that is kind of the full spectrum of how you're trying to secure PII or other sensitive data within your enterprise. So with that, let me move on to kind of the Purview piece. Purview, if many of you are in the data area, you're do data structures and analysts and that sort of thing, you may not have heard of Purview. So it probably is a couple minutes here. Purview essentially is, there's two pieces to Purview. Okay, when we say Purview, it's kind of like a super suite, almost like saying Office. Office has many components. It has, Word, Excel, PowerPoint. Well, Purview is kind of also a super suite. It has the Azure Purview, which goes against all the Azure services, and then it has the Office 365 or M365 Purview, which goes against all the capabilities, whether it be in Teams or SharePoint or Outlook or wherever it may be. So essentially, Purview as a suite allows you to look across that in a holistic approach. You can define policies and apply them to both sets of data, whether it be structured or unstructured data. So looking here, you have your data map in the middle, and you can define those policies and apply them no matter where that data lives, because we've been talking a lot about Azure and about ADX, but we know that you're going to have data that lives in other locations, like on-premises, like other clouds, multi-cloud, that's what multi-cloud means, third-party clouds, and also within the Azure cloud. So how do you bring all these together? That's where you're looking at this approach to creating insights on data usage and discovering where data is being consumed for, and and who is consuming it, consumed by, and then allowing you to create a overall data catalog that allows you to get insights into how it's being accessed and how it's being shared and how it's being used. So with that, I think the next thing is great. Dean, I like this thing that, you can use Purview with ADX, but, how much code do I need to write? And the answer is 0. You essentially have a built-in ADX connector. So you go in, you have a connector that you light up within ADX that enables the Purview capabilities. It gives you the scalable kind of policy-based approach as opposed to a row-level approach. And it's not just security, it's policy. So how do you use it, where you can use it, who you can share it with. So it's a little bit different from the row-level security approach, and it's a little bit more holistic. And there's a link up at the top about how to actually implement this. And I will say that if you're in, it depends on which cloud you're going to be in, whether all these capabilities are going to be there, because they're rolling out across the clouds. I believe right now they are all live in GCC. They are also, I think, the Purview and ADX in GCC High, and so CMK, but I believe CMK is in preview up in the DoD. So it depends on which cloud you're going into, where it is. But the thing about all of this is we have seen time and time again that the implementation of the policy, the securing of the data, the implementation of the connector is not the long pole in the tent. It's always been the definition of the policy. So what we would say is get started today, understanding the capabilities of ADX and CMK with Purview, and allow yourself and the organization to develop that policy-based set of rules that you're going to implement. I've known enterprises back in my SharePoint days that took 2 years to develop their knowledge management policies and decisions. So the long pole in the tent is usually the policy, not the availability of the product. So what we're trying to do is say, get started today. There is the availability to do it inside of the Azure Gov environment, and you can then get it closer to your production environment as those policies are developed. So as far as CMK, okay, I got a thumbs up. I like that. So as far as customer managed key, so the idea behind this, for those of you that don't know about the key vault or managed keys, essentially it is an encryption store, okay, and it's a public-private key sort of approach. And the encryption that is done on the store, the key that is used to unencrypt that is held within your managed key vault that you own, okay? So Microsoft can't get access to it. It just looks like a big old blob. And if, in fact, this was done by one customer, they wanted to essentially throw a grenade into their data storage when they left. And basically, yanking those keys is the way in which you pull the grenade. You could delete the data too, but by pulling the keys, there's no way really to unencrypt it. And so the approach of this is to provide this overall sort of end-to-end sort of scenario. You're not looking at putting your data and not securing it. You're doing row level or other things. You're adding on Purview to do the overall policy base. And then you're doing the next level down, which is controlling who can actually access it and having the enterprise own that key. So with that, I think we are at a point where we wanted to ask the first question. So with that, I think there's a poll. There we go. And I'll pause here for a second.
I'll give a cheat code. It's magic. It's got to be magic, right, Dean?
Well, I don't know. Harry Potter, you know.
I'm teasing. There was a question about releasability and/or dates. Do you have anything that you can share related to customer managed keys and dates in Gov, or is that a topic for another time?
That is something that it's making its way through the approval process, the ATO process. I don't think that they have a date just now because we don't own the government approval process, but it's
Fair.
something that if you're interested in doing this, contact the list of people that was on that original slide, and they
Yep.
can give you exact dates. A lot of the dates are under NDA and such, so we can basically give those based on what cloud they want to use it in and what capabilities that they want to use. Because we're talking about 3 different pieces, and whether if it's in like IL2, Gov, Azure Gov, those all the features are there, but as you go up, they vary on what is
Fair.
available, and that's my
Based off of this approval process. Yeah, understood. Good to go.
exactly. So
Back to you, buddy.
answer that question. Great. So now moving on to regulatory guidance. Now we mentioned about AI, and when we talk to customers, and in fact, if you look at a lot of how the industry has evolved, AI is all about the data, large data sets. The more data, the better. It creates a training machine model. It creates all the MML, the language sets, all the sorts of kind of data aggregation and extraction comes from larger and larger data sets, very much like Tesla's doing self-driving from the large number. I think it has the largest number of inputs or training model for real world sort of visual indicators, being able to figure out whether or not there's a stop sign or not. So those types of large data collection, it goes back to, okay, now that you have all this data, how are you going to secure it? And are there other things that you have to worry about? And I would say yes, security data is the next thing that is probably going to be, on your bailiwick of need to solve or figure out how to archive. Many different enterprises may already store security data, but that data sometimes is stored in what we call cold storage. So think of like a file server or some other sort of tombstone approach. So if you wanted to actually get any sort of insights into that security data, it would have to be rehydrated. It sometimes takes days, weeks, or months in order to get the data out and then figure out what it is. So that's where ADX and kind of the way in which ADX is structured so that it can do real-time query and initiative, but do inexpensive storage. And it also unifies your data platform. So now you have enterprise data that you're trying to provide for AI to be trained for and such forth. And now you have security data. Well, the two aren't mutually exclusive. There are probably some, especially in the Defense Department, there are probably some intersections between enterprise data and security data that you need to train a model or create a large model in order to figure out security threats. An example of this is Sentinel. Sentinel actually has a trainable model for AI. And so there are enterprises that are actually creating their own threat analysis using those modifiable machine languages and customizable languages inside of their enterprise. And by standardizing on ADX, you get all the prerequisite sort of things that I was talking about for the last 30 minutes is, here's where it is, here's how you secure it, here are all the policies and security. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. You bring security data right into it, and then it can be extended exactly like all the other data that you're interested in across the enterprise. Now, what may actually drive this, if you haven't seen M2131, essentially this is, the cyber operator sort of space is getting this, hey, we need to hold on to security data and we need to hold on to it for a period of time. You can read through the entire memo, but this is where a lot of the requirements for storing security logs and data is coming from. A lot of enterprises, a lot of services were doing it as a do matter of course. Sometimes it was used, sometimes it was more of a tombstone to go back and do some investigations. But now, as it being an overall executive order and an approach across federal agencies, essentially the idea is, how do you make it in line with all of your other data? Is there something special that you need to do just for the security data? And the answer really is no. You can do the same things that you've been doing with all the other data. You can do least privileges, you can do policy access, you can do row level security, you can do all of these things and then provide the extensions that you would see in your normal data sets and approaches. So, you have ADX, and you can maybe create a very nice, learning model about how an intruder moves across. You could actually create that using those data sets. So it's not just for reporting anymore, as it were. Okay. So why else would you want to use ADX in order to standardize your security logs and information? Many of you may have heard of something called DART, which is the Microsoft Detection and Response Team. They've been rebranded into Incident Response, but I use the old name because everybody knows about them. They've been in the press for years as far as the SWAT team that comes in and helps customers recover from some sort of breach. This team, one of the best practices that it always would do is to set up ADX. And it does that because of the speed in which it can be implemented and the level of queries in which it can reach out and do joins across the entire organization. So it is fast to set up and it is scalable to the amount of data that they want to put into it. So that's why the ADX sort of approach is their go-to approach for detection and response when they come in for some sort of incident. So my point is, if you use ADX, you're basically IR or DART ready. You're kind of standardizing it on the platform that if you need help from Microsoft and our incident response folk, that's essentially the platform that they're going to come in and look for and utilize when they're there. So it's better to kind of train your cybersecurity folk on that platform because they could side seat drive right with our operators while we're doing detection, learn from what we do, the tools and the queries and such, and then when we leave, they can continue that sort of training after the fact. Okay. So what I mentioned some of these previously, but when you look at security logs of today, many of them, like I said, are cold. So I said that you have to rehydrate them. That's the days, minutes, weeks, months in order to rehydrate. It depends on how large the data set is and how many different places and that it may be stored, and whether it needs to be normalized when it's rehydrated. Next, you look at the fact that some of it is more of query and not Custo. So Custo query language, think of it as the security version of SQL. So if you know SQL language, SQL queries, Custo is very much the same sort of thing. We have very much the ability to look at and suggest kind of the smart tags, the elements of different data sets, joins and other sorts of things. So it's very much, if you were to go out and look on YouTube for KQL, you would think that you're watching a SQL tutorial. So it's really kind of interesting. Having known SQL in the past, I was able to pick up KQL in an afternoon. It's very, very easy. And it's one of the reasons why it's being adopted pretty broadly across the security infrastructure and by operators themselves, because it is an easy way and it's something that they can leverage kind of the knowledge of how they used to write maybe SQL code in previous life. So my point behind that is that ADX and the ability to use KQL against it, not all current storage methodologies for security logs actually is KQL enabled. And so they may have a harder time doing the queries. And that means that in order to answer information about the incident, it may take them longer. Okay. Next, what you're looking at is sometimes this storage of this information is in different locations. So it may be on premises, it may be in a third-party cloud. And trying to make that connection back into Sentinel would be a little bit more difficult because it's going to be a remote join. It's going to be slower because of that remote query. And all the fields may not be there. But if you design it inside of Azure ADX, you can do those queries in a more integrated, holistic way in which the data tables are normalized so that when you're doing the queries and you're looking at the information, it is coming back in a unified approach. Now, how does that kind of vet across the entire scenario? Well, when you're doing a query and looking at how a threat actor, a bad guy, got into the network and where they moved across. Did they move over into a file server? Did they try to do elevated permissions? Did they access data? Did they, try to take over a data source? Those types of, what did they do? How did they do it? When did they do it? And what are some of the alerts that are going on? And are there any other threats that are similar to this that are going on? If you're trying to ask that question, Sentinel and ADX together, you can ask those questions about this horizontal kind of Uber scenario, this horizontal movement. And so when you're looking at, do I care whether or not it is the data, the security logs are integrated with the overall platform? The answer is yes, because the closer it's integrated, the closer that it's queryable, the better data you're going to have, and the better the mission agility is going to be to answer those questions. Okay. So I think, Andrew, what was the question? What security implications? I didn't.
Yeah, we got from a Navy mission owner, and it's pretty general, but I'm just curious to get your thoughts. It's what are the security implications and considerations we need to address when migrating sensitive naval data and systems to cloud environments, and how can we ensure the integrity, confidentiality, and availability of our critical assets in the cloud? So you're talking about a lot of that, but I don't know if you have any kind of final points on that.
I think that it is. Yeah, it's a nuanced conversation, but essentially you have to choose the right cloud that it goes into, right? And we have all the various different clouds. You can look at, the GovMag that extends all the way from GCC or IL2, IL4, IL5, DoD sort of approach. And then there's the secret and top secret. So it depends on where that data needs to be living, and the infrastructure in which you are hosting that data is actually in an accredited cloud. So that's number one. That's the kind of the table stakes of it. Then secondly, we've talked a lot about once you have it in the appropriate location, the appropriate cloud for the right type of classification of the data, then we've talked about things like either row level or Purview or CMK. Now, CMK can be used, directly against ADX. And so you have the ability to do the customer managed keys and take that key away. So you own that key and you have command and control of that key. So that is kind of the long-term vision of how we see not only getting the protections of that given cloud, but also securing the data in its data source, auditing the access of the data in the data source, and then allowing the government to essentially take the keys and own those keys long term. So that is kind of the summary of how I would answer that. There's more nuance as you go through different types of data, where they're stored, aging, and that sort of thing. So I would want to give a much fuller answer, but that's kind of a generic kind of answer.
Yeah, no, I like the way you kind of took it from the strategic level down to tactical, right? Starting big picture, start with your cloud environment that you need to target. And then once you're in that cloud environment, resources you're going to leverage, and then what access and how to do that depending on the data. But that is the construct there, right? Of kind of how to approach it at that strategic level, and then working its way down tactically. And we have all, that's all available right today. So thanks for addressing that, Dean.
No problem. So many customers that I've talked to have said, great, everything that you said, all the above, awesome. How do we do this? What does it look like? And so I put together a diagram for a couple of customers that were looking at doing this, about how do they flow their security data in through the telemetry gatherers. Okay, that's like MDI, MDO, and MDE. So those are just acronym soup for Microsoft Identity Protection, Endpoint Protection, and Office email and file protections. And then the Azure Active Directory, or Entra, those are all essentially the authentication. So all of the things on the far left are your imports, your telemetries that you're getting. And then those go into Azure Sentinel. Now, like MDI, ADX could be another input. You could actually have ADX or Purview as a input into Sentinel. Okay, so you get all the telemetry. Then that telemetry, you don't need 100% of the data normally. You want to normalize it. You want to figure out what is the data that you need long term. There's growing sort of debate of what is actually in the memorandum. Sometimes people interpret it as all data, and some people are saying, well, it's all important data. So we'll leave it up to the government and to each enterprise to define what they need to maintain. But by normalizing and trimming it using either Logic Apps or Event Hub, we've seen the ability to reduce the overall log data down by about 83%. So that's a huge dramatic storage savings right there. Then you actually can decide whether you're going to move it into ADX or into the cold storage. We would prefer that it stay in ADX because it makes it much more valuable, but it depends on how long you have to maintain it. And at some point, there's a diminishing return. So you're probably going to use more of a FIFO approach to move things from ADX into the storage long term. If there's something that is like, well, you must maintain data for 10 years. Okay, you probably wouldn't maintain that in ADX. You'd probably do 180 days, maybe 360 an entire year. Because if there's a threat that's found outside that bounds, you're going back and you have time to do all the research and rehydration. Okay. What all of this sorts of points to is that you're getting the ability to not only prune down the data, but actually with ADX and the query KQL, you can actually query the language in near real time. There's some processing time that needs to be done because it's kind of warm. We keep it warm. There's a hot, there's a warm, and there's cold. The storage off to the side, the blob storage is cold. Warm and hot live within ADX, and essentially you can kind of tune that yourself. The great thing about it is Purview, which is the little eye in the sky up atop, kind of sits and it can look at log analytics and ADX and the blob storage, and in fact, the broader sort of set of Azure capabilities. Okay. So with that, I think we are to another question. More funding.
Not going to give away the answer this time, Dean.
No.
Back to you, bud.
Okay, cool. So if the poll is closed, I think, there we go. All right. So let's go on to the next slide. All right. So next steps, everybody is sitting here going like, okay, great. I think I understand how all this works together. I love the fact that you can normalize and standardize on ADX as your platform. We know how we can secure it. Now, how do we do this? How do we move forward with this? Well, it's actually going to be a people and processes sort of thing, I would say, is in the beginning, because everything generally throughout DoD and the federal government, and by extension, and even the ISV's sort of realm, starts with the policies, and you're going to have to develop what looks right to you. And the right people that you're going to want to bring into this conversation are people like the business and mission owners. You're going to want to bring in the data architects, the security operators, the information governance, the compliance and accreditation owners. So all of those people together in kind of a SWAT team in order to talk about how you innovate and protect data. And many of these people are going to know, like, I really don't want to look at this. The AI sort of wave coming should be the thing that gets all these people in a room together, because with AI, there is going to be no hiding your data. It is not security through obscurity anymore. It is going to be, hey, it is AI within your cloud. It is within your enclave. It is your data within your sort of space, right? In the parlance, the Navy won't have Army using their AI model, and they're all kept separate. Okay, great. But even within the Navy's AI domain or realm, you're still going to have the ability of data to be found that people probably didn't know what was there in the first place. So really, you need to get together and start doing your data cataloging and getting ready for AI using this group. And I would say OpenAI as a key initiative, because everybody wants to embrace it, everybody wants to use it, but now the work comes down that you actually develop policies and figure out whether the data sources are ready for you to turn it on, because we don't want to get to a SharePoint moment whereby it goes out and it finds a document and somebody goes like, where did you find that document? And it's like, well, it wasn't secured, so we just found it and anybody can read it. You don't want to get back into that sort of scenario. Okay, next, we are here. We bring expertise from a multitude of arenas. We have dedicated teams and people that can engage, can explain how the security information can be used within the data log, ADX, and catalogs, how it can be operationalized, how to work with you on compliance, whether it be Purview, e-discovery, information barriers. There's a whole nother conversation that we can have around setting up the deeper capabilities of Purview. So information barriers is, Andrew and Kayla, I don't want them to be able to talk with each other, right? So I'm going to set up an information barrier between them, and they can't actually share information between the two of them. So those types of high-end scenarios, we can talk about how do you do this for not only your structured, but your unstructured data, and a kind of a roadmapped approach to get to, kind of the data nirvana of everything is secure everywhere, and we have full audit and visibility. That's really where we want to get you to, and it is going to be a journey that you have to kind of start today. How we engage, we have different sorts of engage models. We have the ability to do design sessions, workshops. A lot of the people on this call can help just in the initial conversations of what can be done where right now. And so we're not kind of, I've been giving this idea of what you can do in general. That's going to be, like, again, going to be determined on which cloud you're in, because things are working their way up in the ATO process. Okay, so we can say, here's what you can do today, here's what's coming in the future, and here's how you get ready. Okay, and so with that, everybody always asks, well, hey, I have all this data everywhere, and how do I map it in? And can I bring in and integrate other information? So this is essentially all the different data maps that are allowed, data sources within Purview and ADX. So you can basically kind of look at this as far as blob storage and SQL and Power BI. Everything in gray is already supported. Everything in blue is being looked at to come along to support you long term. Down below, there's a link. That link will take you to essentially a different view of a chart about all the different types of data sources and their overall status. All right, to look
Hey,
at
Dean.
yeah.
And Andrew, real quick, just wanted back on that last illustration.
No,
That's a living, and you well know, this is a living, breathing document. This is probably, as of the update yesterday, maybe even out of date, right? Because we're constantly updating our data connectors.
Yeah.
So if there are specific questions about even one that is in the blue, feel free to reach out to Dean, myself, Stephen, or some of the other emails that we have posted to get, most up-to-date information. So just wanted to add that. Thanks, Dean.
Yes, I will double down on that, and that is, this is all the publicly available information. There are some things that are discovered under NDA or that may have lit up in the last 24 hours. That's why the link down at the bottom is going to be kind of the publicly available information. If you don't even see it in that, then reach out to the team that was mentioned at the beginning, and they can track down individual data sort and whether or not it is actually enabled in which cloud again. Right, it's going to be, your mileage may vary depending on the cloud. So with that, here's a bunch of resources. All the things that I've talked about throughout this entire presentation for the last exactly 50 minutes and 26 seconds will be kind of covered here. You guys can go through and click through and get the deeper meaning and information about each of these topics. And other than that, I want to thank everyone for joining. And if there's no other questions, or I'm going to stay on for a couple minutes and see what other questions that we have. Oh, yeah, and we have one last poll.
All right, as folks are filling out that last poll question, Dean, thank you very much for your time, not just today, but the prep work that went into this presentation and the decades worth of experience that you have addressing this topic and more at Microsoft. I've been working with federal customers. Obviously, the answer to a lot of the questions today was it depends. It depends on which cloud. It depends on the characteristics of your data. Who's the role-based access control element in terms of more at the tactical level. So I just appreciate the time and energy that you took into that. So with that, what we call saved rounds, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put another prompt here in the chat. What this is this is a forms link. We'd love to hear we'd love to hear from you. We'd love to hear some critical feedback about the topic. Maybe some questions that a session like this had conjured up. If you're watching on recording, what you can do is you can actually go and interact with the chat there. There's emails, there's points of contact, and there's also some links to resources that we had there. What questions do you have? Is this resonating with you and your respective command? And on top of that, how'd you think Dean did? Now I ask that you treat Andrew nicely. And then, be gentle with your criticism of myself. I get sensitive. Dean, just telling me did a good job. I'm just teasing. So no, we all work really, really hard to make sure that your feedback and your need at the mission level is supported. And so with each one of these sessions, we want to make sure that we take the time to craft content, to craft answers to questions that you go to, because it's what we do every single day. We try to solve problems in the context of Azure and solve them at the mission level. So, Andrew, any other rounds that you have before I talk about these upcoming sessions?
No, we're here as a resource. Feel free to reach out to us on a wide range of topics as they pertain to Azure and its applicability in your own mission area. Dean and also Julia Bradford, always a pleasure, and thank you so much for being a tremendous resources and presenting today. So that's all I have. Back to you, Stephen.
Fantastic. Fantastic. All right. Well, we are going to talk about some upcoming sessions here real quick. Obviously, the feedback form, it is there in the Teams chat. If you're watching this on recording, feel free to copy that and paste that into your URL. As far as the next upcoming sessions and what we have coming up, one of the resources that Dean had talked about is the Data Talk podcast. There's a link to it on Spotify and on Apple Podcasts. You can go back and listen to those as well. Submit your questions there. Give some review. We've got some other video content in terms of diving into specific details for the respective data products. And so with that, I mean, really, we just want to let you know that this time next month, I think March 21st is our next session. It's going to be the Innovation Landing Zone and Azure Open AI and the connectivity between those two topics and how we can enable your command using generative AI. Obviously, you need to build on what Dean had talked about in terms of AI readiness. In I think it was slide, I can't remember which one it was, like 17 or something like that, where he talked about AI readiness. So very, very helpful topic. Dean, thank you very much for your time. Appreciate everybody else joining today. We'll see y'all.
Thanks, everybody.
Take
See you
care.
soon.